Welcome to storytelling time in glorious binaural sound. So, if you haven't heard before my real ghost stories from my past, you can check them out with my old video called My Real Ghost Stories. It's an old, one of my first videos on this channel. So you can go back in time and watch it before watching this one if you want some chronology. Although, even in that video, I think I was skipping back and forth. So, first of all, time frame. I must have been 12 or 13 at the time. Sorry, I'm confusing my stories. Time frame. I must have been 20 or 21 at the time. And I was back from, coincidentally, the apartment of the same friend from whom I was coming back when I was a teenager and had one of the episodes that I mentioned before, the one with the invisible threat. So, years later, still friends with the guy. He moved to the big city. I moved to the big city. So I was hanging out with him during the first few months that I moved here, and the evening was beautiful. Again, perfect temperature, perfect summer weather. But I missed my bus, the last bus of the evening. So I was like, man, I'm gonna have to walk for like 3 hours and a half before getting home because I lived in a completely different neighborhood. So I was, resigned, but at the same time, calm because I realized nice walk at night in the summer, peace and quiet, time to think, nice break. So I was a university student at the time, so I had a heavy workload. I had lots of paintings and drawings to do for my art classes, and that night was going to be very inspiring, I thought. So I started walking, and I went through different neighborhoods. The first one was scaring me before I got there because it was called the McGill Ghetto. The McGill Ghetto. Ghetto always, conjures up some scary imagery of gangs and violence and danger. But I found out when I was in that neighborhood that it was actually just a nickname for a relatively posh neighborhood in Montreal where a lot of students from the McGill University were housed in, either private buildings or houses, or there was actually student housing in the area. So that's why they called it that, not because it was any kind of crime area. So I was scared before I entered the neighborhood, and then I was in it and I was like, where's the danger? So I kept on walking and walking and noticing the different neighborhoods I went through. And, probably in the middle of the trip, I was in what is called the Westmount neighborhood, which is quite posh. We're talking mansions. We're talking mansions high on the hill, while the avenue, Park Avenue, is called. I think it was Park Avenue. Pretty sure it was. Which is way lower than the hill where the mansions are built. But on the same level as the street, there is a slant and then a park, which you can see from the street. And as I was walking in front of the park, I noticed that the lighting was quite beautiful on the leaves of the trees because it was old style lamp posts. A little bit steampunkish. Even though back in those days I did not know steampunk existed, but it was definitely something older, older than the 20th century, and at least in style. The lighting was electrical, but the color was really yellowish and old-fashioned. And I decided, wouldn't it be a great idea to come back with a camera and take lots of pictures to get some inspiration for my paintings? That's what I was thinking. So I decided to explore a little bit. It's not like anyone was waiting for me at home. So, and sleep deprivation was my specialty. So I decided to explore a little bit, and I went in the park, and I noticed different things that I thought would be interesting. to photograph later if I came back, in following weeks. Hopefully that same summer. It never happened. So I kept on looking, and eventually I noticed that I was going further and further in one direction. It felt like I had been walking a while in the park, but it was actually, 1 minute from the street. So my perception of time and distance was already affected, and I felt myself needing to go in one specific direction, as I was saying, and I noticed a barn, a miniature barn, which looked like it was made to look ancient, looked like an authentic barn with barn wood, old and grayish. You know how wood gets old over time, but you could tell it was designed that way. It wasn't as old as it was supposed to be. And there was a golden or brass, round, old-fashioned door handle on the door of the barn, and that was strange. But at first I didn't notice it was strange. I just kept on walking in that direction, slowly but surely, attracted to that barn, which was, slightly taller than I was in terms of where the door is, but the roof was a bit taller. But it was a small barn. I mean, you could not fit a horse in there, I think. Maybe a fowl, but it was a small thing. I assumed it was, when I was thinking about it, I assumed it was for storing some gardening tools for maintaining the park, maintenance of the park. So, anyways, I wasn't thinking about that when I was walking towards it. I was actually in a trance. I was fascinated by the golden light that I was seeing in my mind, not with my eyes. But again, I was not thinking of the difference. To me, I was surrounded by golden, warm light, like a magical amber kind of color, orangish yellow, magical, glowy, and I was in it, and it was in me, and I was walking towards the source of it, which seemed to be inside or around the barn. I was just about to reach with my hand and grab that door handle to turn it and open the door when something panicked inside of me, a warning, some kind of alarm bell in my mind and soul that snapped me out of it. Literally, it snapped me out of it. And as soon as I snapped out of it, the golden light was gone, even though I could still perceive it a little bit. I was no longer enveloped in it. I was far away from the barn, at least 12 feet away. Even though I was about to touch the handle, it must have been my mind, my soul, or my energy being touching the door handle. And to this day, I'm 38 years old. I was 20 back then, possibly 21. And after all these years, I'm still convinced that if I had touched that handle with my mind self or my energy self, I would have been gone, either physically or mentally or spiritually or all of the above. There was something after me, or anyone who might have had the misfortune of being there at that time, that night. So I was freaking out without panicking too much. I always thought, actually, I was told by a friend that, never panic. It's not a good idea. He got that from Douglas Adams, and he was right. Don't panic. Panicking never helps. You're losing control. That's what it is. So I was afraid. I was in shock. But I had to do something. So I stepped back. I started walking backwards, keeping my eyes on the door, especially the handle, walking slowly back until I was far enough and comfortable enough to turn around. I did that because I am very much into fairy tales and stories and fantasy, of course, as some of you might know. And in many of the stories, it's either you never turn your back to a threat, or you should not turn around if you're fleeing away from it. But I also know that for some predators, running away quickly is a provocation, and they need to attack you at that time. So I combined all of this, and I was like, I'm stepping back slowly, keeping my eyes open, not blinking, and then when I feel it might be safe to turn around and run, then I will. So I did, I wasn't even thinking about doing it. I just did that. It was so fast in my mind. Something was protecting me, obviously, because I would not have snapped out of it by myself. So, which reminds me of another story that I'm going to follow with. Thank you. I knew there was something else in there of my past. So, anyways, I once I started running, I couldn't stop until I was exhausted and far away from that area of the park. Now, I was panting, I was exhausted, I was walking home, and I was shaken by what had happened. But since other things had happened to me before, I was able to cope with it. I just got home and went to sleep. But for years, for 3 years, I was thinking back on that episode, and part of me wanted to go back and take photographs of that place. Part of me still does want. Maybe I'll do this for this channel if you insist. Let me know. I'm still, I'm still in town. I still know where it is. But for 3 years, I did not know where it was because I didn't have to go in that neighborhood anymore, and I just forgot how to get there. Thankfully, I guess, for those 3 years when I was wondering about it. And then one day, I was fully in my new career of being a puppet builder, performer, and teacher, and I was making a point to go see a lot of puppet shows. And one was advertised at a park within my neighborhood, and I decided to go. But strangely enough, there was no such puppet show, and I was quite disappointed. So I called the organizers because I knew them, and they told me you went to the wrong park. There actually is two parks. There are two parks with the same name because of the mergers of different neighborhoods or smaller cities that now are part of Montreal, and they did not bother to change the names of the park. So at the time, I don't know if they did since, but it was quite strange. Anyways, the next weekend when another puppet show was being performed at the actual park, I knew where it was, so I went. And the moment I stepped off the bus, I recognized where I was, even though it was summertime again, but daytime. And in light, everything was, I was feeling great. Again, beautiful weather, beautiful lights, the sun, the blue sky, a few little white puffy clouds. I thought it was like what they're trying to show in Disney movies or all sorts of even Miyazaki movies, that a perfect sky, a summer's day. It was that and more. Like the brightness was just right. What an inspiring day. But then I was conflicted because I recognized the park. That's the park where the shed is. What shed? You know, the shed that tried to kidnap me and bring me to another dimension. So I was conflicted because on the one hand I was afraid of that park, and I'll admit it, I was afraid. What if something like that happens again? But my other side was like, it's summertime, it's the daytime. They won't dare to get you or anybody while everybody else is watching. And I was like, that's true, and also I'm not feeling any kind of threat. Might as well go and see what happens. So I did. I walked forward across the street. I passed the bush that was hiding the shed and realized it was indeed that same park. And the barn doors were opened. There was a table, a folding table that was unfolded, and it was full of little cushions that they were handing out for people to sit down on the grass and watch the puppet show, which was happening behind the barn under a tree where there was a stage, a temporary stage set up there. So you were watching the puppet show and the barn was behind. And at first I kept on looking back to make sure that it wasn't going to do any shenanigans and put people in danger. But eventually, considering I had no alarm bells going off in my head, I just eventually focused on the puppet show, enjoyed it a lot, and got to hang around with the artists at the end and the organizers. And years later, I got to work for that same type of event in that same park. And strangely enough, a few years ago, when I did last work there as pre-show entertainment with one of my puppets, I needed to change back into my civilian clothes, and I asked where I could change, and they pointed at the barn. And my rebellious side let me do it. I was, oh, well, let's see what happens. So I actually went in the barn, closed the door, and got changed in there. And nothing happened. I wasn't feeling any kind of threat, which leads me to believe that that threat that happened years before was a roaming threat, kind of like the invisible threat from years before when I was a teenager. I have felt a few of these over the years, and it's always, I think, a good idea to run if you can away from it if you feel it coming on, because err on the side of caution. These things can mangle your mind or your body. There's something about that. It's a kind of information that you get without anybody needing to tell you. There's this ticking sound that I'm not sure where it comes from. I have found it. I'll address it before another video is made. Now, when that happened, when the first episode of the park shed happened, for 3 years I was wondering about what that meant, what it was. Was it positive? Was it negative? I would have a majority tendency to believe that it was negative, considering that my alarms went off. Whatever or whoever is protecting me in such cases and others alarmed me for a reason, woke me up, snapped me out of it. So that feeling of dread that took me over as soon as they were able to contact me, even though I was in some kind of a trance, tells me that they wouldn't waste so much energy trying to snap me out of it if it was something positive. Their job's to protect. So, and that's another piece of information that I have without knowing the origin of. So, anyways, for a short, brief period of time, I thought that maybe the shed episode was some form of weird, distorted premonition. Because when I was a child, well, mostly when I was a young adult, I had some premonitions, and none of them turned out to be important. None of them had any meaning that I could or can today assign to. But I had a few, so I thought for a bit that maybe the shed episode was a strange way to show me something, since nobody else was around, since I was probably tired, since I was more open to suggestion. Something might be warning me about the future. And I thought for a while, before I went back to the shed, that it might have been a premonition of a few years later, when I would have become full-time in my career with all the insecurity that it brings, which I still live today because it's not easy to make a living doing this. And I thought maybe I was panicking because of the feelings of insecurity from the career. But that was a bit too far-fetched for me, and I discontinued that idea because I've been thinking about it for years, and as soon as I went back to the barn and felt no threat whatsoever, I felt certain that it had been a roaming, or at least a specific place in time and space where that threat was able to act. Whatever it was, to me, the feeling I had the first time when it happened was that I'm going to be taken somewhere else. Some other dimension, some other world. Was it fairies? Was it like the old tales from Europe where the fairies take you down in the underworld, their world, the Seelie court or the unseelie court, and keep you for 1,000 years? Part of me was like, why don't you go? See what kind of interesting life you might lead over there. The other part was like, yeah, as if I wouldn't put my foot in my mouth and insult someone by mistake and get turned into a toadstool or something. So didn't have time to think about all these things. It was after the fact that I did. But part of me was fascinated and disappointed that I didn't go, But the other part, the majority part, is grateful that I was snapped out of it and saved from it. So let me know if you insist. I might go back, take some pictures at night, but I would have first to bring my own lighting equipment, because this camera, as good as it is really greedy in terms of lights. I tried to take some video outside this morning before the sunrise, and it was extremely dark. I couldn't do it. I even had a headlamp and taped it to the front of my setup, and it was far from sufficient, even at maximum ISO and everything like that. I might need some kind of special lens, or definitely some kind of LED panel that I might use as a light source in future videos. So I can't afford one right now, but if you want me to afford it, you know what to do. Next story. I was a young adult around the same time, actually, as when the episode that I just mentioned happened. I was going to my first job interview for since I moved to the big city. I had jobs before, but I never had an actual interview in the more formal sense of going someplace and meeting a potential employer and convincing them you can do the job. And I was lost. It was a new neighborhood to me. I was in an industrial area, close to a residential one, and I had a meeting into a donut shop because it was convenient for the employer to be there waiting for me. But I was lost and panicking. I was on my bicycle, and I stopped and looked around to find out where I was. I had checked the map before I left home, but my instructions were not clear, I guess, because I got lost along the way and I was panicking. Did not want to be late to my appointment and lose the opportunity to do the job. To be specific, the job was going to be teaching basic cartoon techniques in elementary schools during lunch hour or after school. And I thought that would be the coolest job ever, because one, I would be able to earn some money, but two, it was something that I loved doing, drawing. I was not a specialist in cartooning, but I thought the exercises are basic, so I can learn them first, then I can share them. I'll have a good perspective to share with the students. And I also had other techniques I could share, so I thought this would be perfect for me. While I was at university, I could earn extra money by doing this. So in a panic, thinking, man, I lost it, the opportunity, I just messed up, sorry. But then I was like, please help. And I was actually praying at that point. I know how dramatic that sounds, but for me it was very important to have my first job in the city, get me started and start having some money so I could pay for my art supplies and the rent, of course. So I thought, anything helps. So please help. Out of the blue, a few seconds, maybe a minute after I asked for help, someone turns up out of the blue behind me on my left. I think might have been right, but I think it was left. And hello, may I help you? And it was a lady that looked particularly old-fashioned. She looked like a Mary Poppins in brown. She was she was dressed with, I think it's called a petticoat, maybe, I'm not sure, but she had different kinds of layers, and she had a dress, a long one. She had, most everything was brown or tan, and she didn't have she did not have an umbrella, but she had a big bag that had patterns on it. And she looked like she was out of time, or even perhaps out of everything, like she did not exactly know how to dress to blend in our era, or maybe like she had been somewhere else before and jumped to this time frame just to help, because that's what happened. I said, hi, actually, yes, I'm lost. I don't know where I am, and I think I'm pretty close to where I need to be, but would you happen to know where we are? And she says, actually, and she reached into her bag and she had a map of the city, and she knew exactly how to unfold it to get to the neighborhood square or quadrant where we were, so that she could immediately help me to go where I needed to go. So that was a little bit strange. So we looked at the map, and I told her I need to be at that address, and she knew exactly where that was on the map for some strange reason. Immediately she pointed with her finger. This is where we are. Actually, I should go. This is where we are, and you have to go there. So you take the street and you cross her in a diagonal, and with your bicycle, it shouldn't be an issue. And pay attention to the um, traffic direction, but you should be there in 10 minutes. And I was blown away by how helpful she was, and thanked her profusely, and got on my bicycle, turned around one more time to thank her as I was riding off, but she was gone. Now the thing is, I was in an industrial area, a very open space, everything was pavement. The only building next to us was a store with the whole front of it being windows, so you could see all the way to the very end, to the back store of the store. So there was no way she would have gotten in the store that I couldn't see her. There was no way that she could have hidden behind anything. I would have heard her walk away because she has boots on, but she just was gone, just like she had appeared out of nowhere. She was gone instantly. So all I could think of was she was some kind of angel, some kind of being sent to help. And I didn't know why I would warrant any kind of help of that sort. I mean, it's pretty unusual, and it seems to be the kind of thing in stories that people tell where it's a matter of life and death, where people get that sort of help, and the character disappears. And but that's all I could think of, and still today I'm convinced that she was there to help, and either by mission or on a whim, because I was there and she was there and she wanted to help one more person. I think this is more likely than a destiny changing thing, but then again, we don't know how far one little gesture, one little decision will affect the rest of our lives. So maybe if I had been late, I might have missed another opportunity. Who knows? I couldn't trace it back later to anything. I'm grateful I had the help. And it turns out that this job was a lot of fun and I learned a lot. But I also had to resign after a bit because I realized it was too much work for very little pay, which was sad because I loved doing it. It was a motivating job, but considering I was paid $12 an hour and it took me 3 hours to, 2 hours of transportation, back and forth, total 3 hours. You work 3 hours to be paid $12. That is not enough to justify the effort of carrying a big box of paper photocopies for the step-by-step instructions, and take the buses and stuff. I don't have a car. I never did. And biking, bicycle would have been insufficient because they would send me at all ends of the city and nowhere near where I was living, or nowhere near the school where I was going. So yeah, I had to resign, but I learned a lot. I learned, first of all, that I could be a teacher, and I became a teacher after that. So maybe that was the important bit that I was being helped with. Interesting. Never thought of it that way. Yeah. So that was one time when I had special help. This reminds me of another strange event when I was a child. Our father took my two siblings and I to a nature to a park in the forest where there were dozens of waterfalls and little pools of water on the rock. The rock had been worked by the water for millions of years, and it was beautiful. It had, showers, places of waterfalls, and that ended into small pools, some of them quite deep, some of them quite wide and shallow. There were all kinds for all kinds of tastes and preferences, and all families were there to swim and just relax, almost like in a jacuzzi that was not heated. Quite refreshing indeed, and I enjoyed myself there a lot. On the way back from our afternoon there, our father insisted that we should wear our shoes so that we wouldn't cut ourselves on the rocks as we walked back home. But I told him, it's slippery with the shoes on. I don't want to slip and hurt myself. And of course, being who he was, who he is, less of that today. But back in those days, no nonsense, don't argue. This is what I'm telling you to do, so you're going to do it. So, of course, I was right. Even though you're a kid, you sometimes, understand certain things. And of course, we slipped a lot, and I slipped enough that I fell into a deep but narrow water hole. It was a column of rock, a column of water in the rock, and it felt like it was at least 20 feet, 24 feet deep. It wasn't. I was a child. Everything looks bigger, of course, when you're a kid. But I sunk to the bottom. I pushed. I had the reflex of pushing with my legs to try to get up and take a breath, because I didn't when I first fell, and I was able to take one last breath before I ran out of energy. I was panicking, and I sank deep, and I thought, that's it, I'm gone, this is it, goodbye mom, and siblings. I was like, that's it, I'm gonna die. I was actually swallowing water when some kind of savior came to help. He was a tall shaped, not like not not muscle competition kind of guy, but he was lean muscles, and to me he looked like Tarzan. He looked like Tarzan, but more white, I guess. He had long blonde hair, and he had some kind of tribal style necklace, and some kind of wooden or bone like fetish pendant. I don't know. Maybe some beads with that. It was a bit vague because I barely had time to. I didn't even have time to say thank you, because he actually dived into the pool of water, and he grabbed me and he brought me up. I was coughing the water out, and I was about to turn around to help him, and he was gone. So I told my dad, because he had been away when I fell. My brother and sister were there first, I think. And I told him I almost died. And he was like, you're exaggerating again. Big imagination, and blah, 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 blah. That story was just brought back to mind because of the Mary Poppins character, because that might have been one of those as well. Because out of nowhere he came, and then he was gone. There was, again, the topography of the place made it very difficult for anybody to walk or even run away without being detected. And on my way back, I tried to convince my father about what happened, and he doesn't even remember the story. Years later, when I was an adult, I told him about it, and he thought I invented the whole thing. So, adults, I swore I would never be like that, and I still am not. So, I'm an adult, but I mean, I'm not going to be the adult that dismisses what a child says just because it's a child. You listen, of course. You might have a grain of doubt, but please pay attention, because what they say might be true. So, strange protection. That seems to be the theme right now. I mean, throughout this video, strange protection, because there were so many times in my life when I was in deep trouble, and I could have hurt myself severely or even died, but something took over. Something was there to give me a nudge in the right direction, so I would be, if not fully intact, at least not suffer as much as I could or should have. For instance, I had a bicycle accident a few years ago here, coming back home where I still live, and my front wheel of my bicycle was captured by a small pothole or a sinkhole in the asphalt between the street and the sidewalk, as I was trying to get onto the sidewalk for a brief time to go and lock my bicycle in the front yard like I usually did. but that hole must have been new, or I must have taken it from a different angle. It grabbed the wheel, and blocking the movement of my forward motion, I was ejected from the bicycle, and I was flying. Almost. I was actually being projected, and something slowed everything down in my perceptions, like you hear in descriptions of people being in accidents. I know that because I've also been in an accident a few years before that, where everything slowed down, a car accident at that point. But back to the bicycle accident. Um, the wheel got stuck. I was ejected from the bicycle, and in a few seconds, what happened is what I'm about to describe. So everything slowed down, and a feeling of peace overcame me completely. I was smiling, and something took control of my body. I'm a puppeteer, and it felt like something was puppeteering me for a change. I was moving in a way that made me twist my body a little bit and then cross my arms like this, and for some reason that made me spin sideways as I was going. It might have given me more distance, because instead of landing mostly on the concrete sidewalk, is it concrete? I think it's concrete or something like that. Maybe cement. I landed on the grass. I hurt my knee, but it wasn't broken, and I was able to function and keep doing my work. So this is just one time out of many that I had some strange interventions that I can't explain, except for someone, maybe a team of someone's are protecting me and people around me sometimes. And it's pretty fascinating that, even though I'm not religious, I deny, I refuse to believe in those human-made religions that are just about controlling people, their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs, their actions, and certainly their assets. I was in there before, I was brainwashed before, and I decided long ago that since we cannot know for sure what happens after we die, or who's the creator, if there is such a thing, um, why should we fight over it? Why should we pretend that we have the ultimate truth? I can't pronounce anything. The ultimate truth. It doesn't matter. If your God is so powerful, insulting that God, they can take it. They can take it. And being wrong about what they mean, what their message, what their goal, what their rule is, they can handle it. So believe what you must to become a better person, as long as nobody gets hurt. That's what I believe in. I do believe in superior beings, and I don't know their names. I don't know anything specific except that some creatures are evil, some creatures are good, and in my life I've had enough sampling of both that I cannot deny that there is something unexplained, some things unexplained, some people, some beings unexplained that we live with, we share, if only partially, our existence, our planet, our time frame with, and that's what I believe in because of what I've lived. So protection. Let's see what else I have in terms of being protected. Sometimes when I'm going somewhere, either whether it's important or not, I have a feeling of I should turn left instead of right, even though I know I normally would turn right to go where I need to go. Some very strong feeling indicates that I should go left, then I will go left, because these feelings, when I recognize them, they never lead me astray. There's always a reason for that, and it's usually very practical or very pleasant a reason to, when I discover what it was. So if I turn left and it puts me out of my way to go where I need to go, but I'll still do it because the feeling, I recognize what it is, and I just go for it. If I don't listen to it, if I don't act upon it, then if I deny its urging, then I find out later that I missed something, or I find myself in a more inconvenient situation. Sometimes it's just about traffic. If I turn left, I will find out later that there was some kind of roadblock later that I couldn't see at first, and then I avoided it by turning left, going around it. Sometimes it's meeting someone I haven't seen for years, just because I turned left. Just things like that. Sometimes it's seeing something in a shop window that I needed for a while that I couldn't find anywhere. So little helpful tidbits like that I pay attention to because they don't lead me astray. They actually help out. So whenever things like that happen, I try to remember to say thank you to whomever or whatever is helping because I think it's important to show gratitude. So, guardians, protecting. I think that's what I have for now for those stories. I have other strange stories, might as well focus them in just 2 videos until new ones happen to me. I was going again to school. I left on time. I was at the time obsessed with making sure that I left on time. I had a watch on me. I had several clocks at home, and I would double check everything from the computer to my alarm clock to my watch. I always, I was compulsively looking. Actually, at the time, I was wearing my watch on my belt, but I was constantly looking at my watch compulsively. So I was really sure that my schedule was as usual, and it was not one of those days when the daylight savings time was changing or anything, because that happens. I don't think it's even in the same month. So I was sure that, and I checked it after the fact. But this morning I just went to school as usual, and I found myself I was late. Actually, I missed an entire class, even though the trip, the walk from my apartment to the school was literally 15 minutes. I was an hour late. Where did the time go? I did not stop along the way. I left on time. I just walked the same way as I usually did. I didn't run. I just got to school and class was over. And I thought, am I having a dream? Is it being strange? What's going on? So I lost time. And I know many people have lost time before, but that was my most dramatic experience of that. I probably had that before, but when you say you lost time, often it's just that you didn't pay attention. You got in the zone and you just focused too much on what you were doing, and you didn't see the time go. But at that point, it was, literally, I call it a time bubble. That's all I can think of. I was out of time again. That time, not because of a choice of mine. It just happened. It was like I stepped out of it, or it stepped forward, leaving me behind. I don't know. Or is it? Well, I'm kind of confused with the terms. Did it leave me behind or forward? Doesn't matter. All I know is I lost 45 minutes at least, so that's kind of strange. But there wasn't much in the terms of strange occurrences during those 3 years in that small town. So that's just a few strange things that happened in my life. I have others, but do they warrant a story? I don't know. If I remember more, I'll make more videos. But it's kind of fun to see them all in one place, like in this channel. Remind me, I have to think about them when I'm telling the stories. Right before I record, I actually remember more and more. I think a few times. I think about it for a while before I record it, so that it gets back to me more. I get more details for you. So it's fun to have it back. It's more vivid now because pathways get recreated, I guess. But yeah, storytelling is fun and makes you think as well. Like just telling you these things, I realize a few things, or at least I theorize a few things that I might have not thought about before. So, strange occurrences. I don't remember anything else that was. Oh, yes, I do. The same house where I was living for those 3 years at college, in that small town, It had history. I don't know what history it was. I never researched it, but that basement was creepy. And I like basements. They're cooler than above ground, and I've always liked that about them. I like that they're a little bit creepy when they're a little bit creepy, but that basement, something happened in there. I'm sure of it. Something negative because or something was in there. Anytime I found myself in the basement, I was back to my childhood when I was bullied by ghosts. Nothing happened, but it always felt like it was about to. It was something in there that didn't have the energy or permission to hurt me while I was there. But I always made real sure that whatever time I spent in the basement was as short as possible. I wasn't hanging out there. I wasn't playing music. I wasn't storing too much stuff down there because simply because I didn't want to spend time in there. But I had to sometimes. It was the only space I had, especially in the winter, to use spray adhesive for my graphic design projects. Because it was mandatory to use it on the presentation of it. So I couldn't go outside because the glue didn't set properly in the cold. So the only place I had was the old basement, which was extremely dusty. It had some of the old tools in there, random ones, not anything really interesting to me, but lots of boxes, and nobody was using it. It was just old stuff that was forgotten. There was lots of space, so I started storing some of my belongings down there because my room was small. But I really, really avoided going down there, which is strange. It's just a level difference from my bedroom. You know, I felt safe in my bedroom, but as soon as I was in the basement, there was a threat level that I could not deny. So, especially in evenings and nights, which is when I was mostly in there to do my to assemble my projects. But mostly I tried to do that at school on nights when I was allowed to stay in the classrooms. I would actually stay longer than anybody else so I could assemble my stuff and not have to do it in the basement. And light was really limited in there, anyways. Although I brought a spotlight with me, a work light, it was not ideal. So, and I'm not saying that the dark was the reason. It was more than just darkness, because I like the darkness. I've always liked it, except for those few years when I was a child and living in that house that was haunted. I got over it and I got back to being myself, which really loves the dark. So, yep. I just remember that. I can't believe that it escaped. It escaped my memory for a bit. The basement is where I spray painted my first puppet head. Yeah. Wish I had kept that one. Anyways, those were some of the strange stories that happened to me over the years. If anything else happens, or if I remember more from I just remembered one, but I think I could fit it within the time frame. Yes, let's bonus story, premonitions. It's several stories, but they're very small, but together they make one. Back in that same college where I was, where the basement was creepy at my student housing apartment, I had dreams of future apartments. I had premonitions of places I would live in later, which is true. Well, actually, I had one. And before that, before I moved to that apartment, I had a premonition of it. A dream while I was sleeping, but I remembered it enough that I couldn't understand why I was dreaming of a place. But when I dreamt of that college apartment, which was my first place to live outside of my parents' places, I was worried about where I was going to live. I didn't know where I was going to live in college, and I was worried. And something gave me a glimpse of that future apartment of mine, and I felt better. I felt like I saw a moment of peace and quiet in a summer, or what felt like the summer, with the sunshine coming from the window, waking me up in the morning. And sure enough, that exact same setting, feeling, furniture, color of the walls, everything was the same. When I realized the first morning that I woke up in that apartment, because I moved in the night before, um, I realized that was my dream. I had dreamt of that moment as a way to reassure myself. That was nice. And then that same place, I had a dream of my next apartment, which happened to be in the big city where I still live now, but not in the same apartment, of course. I moved a few times since then. But I dreamt of another apartment. I forget which one because I had a few. But these were just the only kinds of premonitions I had before, until the big one, which happened to me when I was visiting the big city. I think I just messed up my chronology here, but please edit the following noise. Back. So I think I messed up the chronology here, but anyways, I was visiting the big city. I was at a friend's place. He was hosting me for a week because it was vacation time for me from college, but I had to go back to finish my year, I think, or for the next semester. Anyways, he was hosting me for a week, and in exchange, I was doing a painting for his sister. I was doing a large portrait of their pet iguana, whose name was Boris. So he was, I was mostly busy doing the paint work, but at night or evenings or some afternoons, we would go out and he would show me the city. And on one such outings, he brought me to the biggest bookstore we had here at the time. It possibly might still be the biggest. I'm not quite sure anymore. But it's called Indigo, or it was called Indigo. Now it's called Indigo Chapters, or maybe Chapters Indigo. But to access that bookstore, we took the public transportation system, and we were walking from underground, reaching up into the shopping mall within which the bookstore is located on street level. It has its own storefront, but it's connected with the rest of the underground shopping mall. We call it Underground City in Montreal. There's a whole lot of tunnels connecting different shopping malls, and those tunnels also have their own shops, so that's kind of interesting. Anyways, we were walking up the stairs, the escalators actually, and we were about to turn the corner where I knew that the bookstore would be. Never been there before, never saw footage of it, never anything, but I was certain that that was the bookstore. And I said, "Stop." And he did. He was surprised at my tone. I said, "Stop. I need you to prove something to me. I had a dream a while ago about this time, about this place, probably this time. Can you move past the corner and tell me what you see? Can you confirm? Well, first I'll tell you what I think you're going to see. There will be a purple man, a purple bearded man. There will be an exhibition of old-fashioned black and white or sepia-tone photographs of buildings, so architectural-based exhibition of old photographs. And that's where the store is." So he did. He actually crossed the corner and he confirmed everything. He said, "Oh my goodness, how did you know that?" I said, "I had a dream of this exhibition, of this storefront, of this place. I can't explain it." And sure enough, the exhibition was there. It was actually for commemorating the way that there was a church or a small basilica, I don't know, a cathedral perhaps, a small church, a small something religious that was lifted or kept up while they were digging underground to create some of those structures underneath, and they were showing pictures of the work in progress that they did years ago. And the purple bearded man was on the wall of celebrities, authors, probably all Canadian authors. I forgot his name, but he was a very bushy haired, slightly frizzy white, or maybe gray at a point, I don't know, bearded guy, but instead of black and white, the picture was purple and white. So, purple bearded guy. that both of us were like very surprised, but that's the only premonition that seems to, that was proven because I had a witness. And to this day, I don't know why I dreamt of that place. Nothing significant ever happened there. Years later, when I moved to town, I went there to apply for a job. I thought maybe that was a sign. Maybe I would get a job there, but I never got hired. The manager was a chaotic person who never returned my call, even though we had scheduled an appointment. So, yeah, I don't know what it meant, if it meant anything, but that's the only premonition that I can say that was witnessed, and it blew my mind. Needless to say. So that was my bonus story for today. Thank you for watching, listening. If you have any questions, ask down there. What do you think about new lighting? I've been looking up some different techniques to light. I think this is better than before. Hopefully it is. And main light, reflector on one side, a slight one, and hair light or a background light to help. Even though I'm dressed in black, you can still see my shoulders. So and the silhouette of my head. So maybe next time I'll put more distance behind me, but for now this is what I could do in the short time I spent on it. So there you go. Rest well. Don't freak out too much. Never panic. And if something strange happens to you, why don't you make a video and share it with us? Have a good day.